Hello, everyone. This is James Tyberonn with Earthkeeper. So we're honored today to have Giorgio Tsoukalos with us on the Earthkeeper interview. Giorgio is an incredible person who is actually doing a great service for humanity. The show that he produces and hosts, Ancient Aliens, is brilliantly researched, well produced, and is offering enlightening information to the masses about the possibility of extraterrestrials, about the potential that our Earth as we know it has a forgotten past and that we were seeded by extraterrestrials. Giorgio, how did you first get interested in the research of ancient aliens?
You know, I have to 100% square this on my grandmother, who was my Austrian grandmother. My dad is from Greece, my mother is from Austria, and my Austrian grandmother, she was a devout Christian, went to church almost every Sunday, but at the same time, you know, even though it was the 50s and the 60s, she was very open-minded. And so she understood that the origins of the Bible and the origins of the Jesus story were rooted in the concept of love and in the word of in the concept of acceptance. And so despite the restrictions of the 60s and the 70s, especially in the European countries, she still explored alternative history ideas, such as the world of Edgar Cayce with Atlantis and other ideas with ancient astronauts or extraterrestrials or the UFO phenomenon. And so these ideas, pretty much whenever my grandmother and my grandpa would show up or would visit, they would become dinner table conversations. And, you know, this was something that was instilled upon me at a very early age. I always was curious about the possibility or the possibilities of life elsewhere.
That's fascinating and interesting that you mentioned Edgar Cayce. In fact, Giorgio, I met you at about 2.5 years ago at the Edgar Cayce ARE in Virginia Beach at the Ancient Mysteries Conference, and you gave an absolutely fascinating presentation there. And so ever since then, we have wanted to bring you to the event that you're coming to in November in Denver. And Edgar Cayce has some interesting readings about extraterrestrials, and of course, John Van Auken is a good friend of yours and of mine. And John speaks about times in which Cayce speaks clearly in readings about extraterrestrial contact in relation to the Mayans, in relation to the Egyptians, and the Atlanteans.
Yes, and, you know, in a strange way, it doesn't surprise me because Edgar Cayce was one of the few people who were in tune with what Eric refers to as the timeless tracks of the universe, meaning where time does not exist, where everything all happens at the same time. And in a strange way, this was beautifully depicted in the movie with Matthew McConaughey. Did Inception, recently did a movie about time travel and space travel with Matthew McConaughey, where they land on or visit a planet, an ice planet, for about a half an hour or 3 hours or something, and then they come back up to the orbiter, and the person on the orbiter has aged by 25 years.
Well, you know, the movie Cosmos as well had a very interesting ending in which the vehicle never left the ground. But, you know, Jodie Foster had this incredible experience. And I think in the movie, the experience took place in about 17 hours. And interestingly,
right, and it all happened in an instant. A lot of people say that time is relative. That the question of time, and especially the question of the Big Bang, to me is very interesting, because imagine if the Big Bang in a weird way never really happened in the way we're being presented. What if there never was a beginning or never an end? If you draw a circle, show me the beginning or the end of the circle. You can't do it if it's a perfect circle. So what if the Big Bang is it never happened and the universe is one giant big circle? Or we embrace the idea of the expanding and the contracting universe, which then would translate into that the whole universe is a heart muscle, which means it contracts and it expands.
Jane Roberts, who did the Seth material, had some before her time, or before the present focus on extraterrestrials came forward. Seth spoke about time being an illusion, and that in the other side of the torus that you're referring to, everything happens at once. And Kurt Vonnegut, in his book Catch-22, said had this experience of a man who became unstuck in time, and when he went up above, he said that a man's lifetime looks like a span of the Rocky Mountains with baby legs on one end and old man legs on the other. And I thought that was a brilliant description.
No, I agree with that. By the way, the name of that movie is Interstellar. And anyone who hasn't seen that movie yet really should go check it out, because it's quite fascinating.
You know, Giorgio, you and I have a common friend that we both have a tremendous amount of respect for, and that's Clifford Mahudi, the Zuni elder, who also has a master's degree in engineering.
Yes.
And we have had Clifford speak at several of our events. And,
okay.
And in a side, about 2 years ago, he and I were both being interviewed for a special on the Grand Canyon produced by the Travel Channel. And so he and I went and had lunch together afterward. And he was telling me an interesting story, and it's going to lead into another question I'd like to ask you about. Clifford told me that years ago on the reservation that he was standing in with a group of people, and he and several other elders, people in senior age, saw an extraterrestrial craft come up in the horizon above a special set of mountains. And he said that none of the younger people saw it. And so his conclusion was that the senior elders, the people that were raised on the reservation at a time when all the teachings of vision questing and of sweat lodges and of ceremonial runs had taken place to teach them how to see the other side, that they had learned that, and that the younger generation had never learned to open the proverbial third eye. And so that brings me to my question, because Graham Hancock, who is also going to be a speaker at our event in Denver, speaks about the human brain not being the generator of consciousness, but the receiver of consciousness, and that consciousness can occur in different brain wave levels. And he speaks of the theta brain wave level as being the realm in which he thinks many of the multi-dimensional extraterrestrials and spirit beings exist. How do you feel about the multi-dimensional aspect, Giorgio?
I absolutely agree with Graham Hancock. However, what I disagree with Hancock is that there are multiple levels, and he essentially says that it goes from our level of consciousness to the next level of consciousness that you can only experience through ayahuasca or DMT and various things like that. And while I never ever have discounted that the spiritual level on DMT and or ayahuasca exists, I still maintain that between our level of technology and spirituality and understanding of the universe, there exist other levels that lead us to that level where we just become spirit or ethereal beings. Well, you and I have known each other for quite a while. We've met each other a couple of years ago at the Edgar Cayce Foundation.
I, have had some interesting experiences, and so I think Cayce speaks about this as well. And it's interesting that the Vatican recently sort of acknowledged the existence of other physical universes.
Exactly.
Seth in the Seth material says that physical reality is the anomaly in our cosmos. And our own scientists say that the dark matter or the antimatter realm makes up as much as 93% of all reality, and that the physical universe is the 7%. And so it appears as though the Vatican is now acknowledging the existence of other forms of life similar to ours, and perhaps others that are not similar so much. But what are some of your most interesting places that you think reveal the presence of not only advanced past civilizations, but of extraterrestrial interventions and contacts?
No, absolutely. And there is always one answer that I give, and it's never the pyramids, it's never the Nazca lines, but quite simply, it is Pumapunku, which is on the outskirts of a archaeological site called Tiwanaku in Bolivia. And that is a place that is at an altitude of 12,800 feet, so quite substantial altitude. The air is rarefied, and it's quite an inhospitable area. And there exists a archaeological site, megalithic, called Pumapunku. And while many tried to make the argument that the stones at Pumapunku are nothing else but soft sandstone, that's inaccurate, because the truth of the matter is that, yes, any of the stone that is in red or that can be seen is a red-colored stone. Yes, that is a red sandstone. However, all of the rocks, for example, the age blocks or the very intricately carved rock that is known as the desk or el escritorio, those rocks you can clearly see are in the color of gray. And that any geologist and any expert will tell you that that is gray andesite. And gray andesite today we would only be able to cut with either diamond drills or with diamond wire saws, or with water or harmonic jets. And, water jets especially. So you have to wonder how our ancestors from at least 1,200 years ago, and some have suggested even 10,000 years ago, if not 15,000 years ago, manufactured or worked these andesite stones.
That is an absolutely amazing place. I am a geologist, and I lived in South America for 9 years, and so I've been to Tiwanaku, and it is absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh, that's great that you were there, so you can attest to my story.
Absolutely.
Can you tell your audience, when you touch the surface, how does it feel?
it's, you feel like you're just in another place, and the evidence there is just so compelling that you realize that there's a lot more going on than our mainstream academics have acknowledged. And
yes,
it is
I was
just,
referring when you touch the surface of some of these cut gray andesite pieces, does it or does it not feel as polished as a bathroom mirror? And what I'm suggesting is that some type of technology was used with which the surface was polished to such a degree that in all likelihood, these pieces were in some way, shape, or form machined. So you as a geologist, would you agree with that notion?
Absolutely, unquestionably. And, my wife and I have actually sat in front of those 8-shaped stones and touched them, as you mentioned, and it is just, it's just astonishing. And I was speaking with Robert Schock, who will also be with us in Denver,
fantastic.
About that, and he agrees completely. And, he has done a lot of amazing work, as have you, regarding Easter Island, and he has some very interesting ideas from an academic level, and that is so important to bring the academic in, and that's one of the many reasons I really admire your program, the work that goes into it, and bringing in academics like Robert Schock is so important.
Well, here's the thing that here we are. We've produced over 115 episodes of Ancient Aliens so far. And as we progress with the multiple seasons, if you compare a show from the early seasons to one that's out right now, the contributors that are speaking on Ancient Aliens that come from universities
yes.
has increased by a tenfold. And I can assure you right now that nobody, is forcing these people to appear on Ancient Aliens, because it's just another way of approaching the way we look at the world.
And, and the new generations are far more cognizant, far more willing to accept these ideas.
Right now, I am looking at a wall of books. These books I've read, I've referenced them, I use them as my armor, as my weaponry for the arguments. And so, this whole idea that these things are secrets, what do you think about that? I mean, it's really not.
You're preaching to the choir. I agree 100% on that topic, and have most of my life. I mean, really, as you say, when you go to places like Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, the evidence is right in front of you, and there are just thousands of other things, that are just glaringly apparent that we are not alone in the universe. And that we are a species that, for one reason or the other, have forgotten our true heritage. So I could not agree with you more on that. And I applaud you for the work that you're doing and the stand that you're taking. And I realize it's not always easy.
No, thank you very much. But I'll tell you what, the embrace that I've received overall ever since Ancient Aliens, that alone has been worth it, because of course there's always opposition that comes along with it, but I've always said I've got the best fans in the world, and I really I'm very, very fortunate to be able to say that.
Absolutely. Robert Schock, as we've been speaking about, was telling me that, he really has a tremendous belief in all of what we're talking about. And he said that in his early days, he met such tremendous academic opposition, and that it was gratifying that 10 years later, after his initial theories on the age of the Sphinx began to be rectified, he said, but he took such a huge attack for a number of years, and he says that, he said that I can now speak at events that I want to because I now have tenure. I can't I can't be dismissed for speaking what I believe to be the truth. So times are changing, and that's
well,
a
and here's
really
what's so wonderful too is that we always have to remind ourselves from where we get our news from, or which academic textbooks or which academic papers we read, because if it's an academic paper that was written in the English or German language, or any of the European languages, then it sort of has to adhere to a certain status quo as it regards to anthropology and especially archaeology. But this is why on Ancient Aliens we allow, for example, or we pride ourselves in having, for example, when we had that episode in which we talked about the age of the stones at Baalbek, well, we asked somebody from Lebanon, an archaeologist from Lebanon, to tell us about the age of Baalbek. And she, without a twinkling of the eye, said, well, we think that this is at least 10, if not 12,000 years old.
Yes.
Now, you will not find anyone in any university in England or Germany or any of the European countries or here in the U.S., unless it's, for example, Robert Schoch or some of the outliers, that, hey, Baalbek, the foundation stones may, in fact, be 12,000 years old. Because why? Hey, come on. It would just completely obliterate the chronology of current archaeology, which, by the way, in my opinion, will be a good thing.
And, you still get the resistance from some of the Egyptian some of the Egyptologists, but the evidence is becoming glaringly apparent. And so, Giorgio, you're also leading tours now. Is that correct?
Well, on September 16th through October 1st of this year, I'm leading a tour of about 35 people through Peru and Bolivia. We're going to Lima, Paracas, Nazca, to the Ica Stone Museum, to the Museum of the Elongated Skulls, and then we take a plane to Cusco to check out Machu Picchu, and then we fly over to Bolivia. Actually, we take a train to Bolivia, a wonderful train excursion. 11 hours on the train. It's an Orient Express, so really nice and wonderful, with a bar and a restaurant car. And in La Paz, or in Bolivia, we will go to the Silustani Towers, and also we will go to the Tiwanaku Museum, and also, obviously, to Pumapunku and Tiwanaku itself. So if anyone is interested in that, we have I think 2 more seats left. If they want to email us, it's office@legendarytimes.com, but this has to come in the next 48 hours, because just today I was on the phone with our tour operator putting on the final touches, but I know that I have 32 people that are very excited to travel with us, and I can't wait to do this.
Well, that sounds absolutely amazing. As I told you, I lived in South America for 9 years and spent a lot of time in Bolivia. And,
That's great. That's fantastic.
Bolivia is such an amazing place. And the Bolivian people are so kind and so sweet-natured. And because the majority of the population are indigenous, they still hold on to their ancient beliefs and are far more open-minded. And, there's some fabulous places in Bolivia, such as the Salar de Uyuni. I'm sure you've heard of Salar Uyuni. It is the largest salt flat on the earth. It's at 12,000 feet. And they actually have an old hotel in the center of it made out of salt. And that area is surrounded by volcanoes. And the Aymara indigenous people there believe that these volcanoes are hollow and speak about Star Nation people coming in and out all the time.
Right, and those stories, to me, are they are the meat to a certain skeleton or to certain types of bones that at some point originated in the truth. So every mythology has a core of truth. And if there are stories of lights coming out of volcanoes and things like that, if it were one thing if those stories are unique. But there are stories of lights coming in and out of volcanoes worldwide. The first things that come to my mind is the lights that come out of the volcanoes at Lago de Atitlan in Guatemala. Then you have these stories at Teotihuacan in Mexico with volcanoes and lights and things like that. I mean, are those all coincidence or is something going on? So, after a while, even coincidence no longer makes sense.
Absolutely. And when I worked in Brazil as a geological engineer, my co-partner, the engineer that was my colleague, was actually from Guatemala. And his wife, her father was actually a Mayan elder. And this is back 30 years ago. And she would tell us stories that her father and her grandfather were allowed to go into deep recesses of caves where they met with a blue-skinned race of people. And, she was a very, very credible person. Her, she had a master's degree and her husband had a master's degree in engineering. And so there are forgotten segments of very credible information. I actually met with Don Alejandro, who is the leader of 84 Mayan nations, and he spoke about, I actually met him in Peru years ago at a conference, and he spoke about this.
Here's the interesting thing, and this may sound bizarre, but, this whole idea, and it's not just an idea, but we can also see it. Okay, so the idea comes from descriptions like in the Vedic text, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all these things. But when you mention, blue-skinned people, this is a direct reflection of what we have described in ancient Hindu texts. So who is to say that some of these extraterrestrials had a blue skin tone? And it would not surprise me in one bit, even though they would look like you and me or any other race on the planet, just in blue.
Absolutely. And, it was interesting that you bring that up because I had a conversation with Lizette about this, and she said that her father told her that these people had a blue-green tint because of all the copper and magnesium in the water they drank. So that's an interesting idea.
Okay. Well, okay. And then it gets very detailed. All right. Yeah.
And so, Giorgio, I was reading your bio, and I saw on there that you speak 5 languages fluently, and I speak French, Spanish, and Portuguese because I lived outside the United States 30 years and I had to learn them. But I really admire you for that, and it gives you that citizen of the world ability. And you were born in Switzerland, is that correct?
Yes, I was. And the reason why I'm multilingual is because, first of all, my mother, she's from Austria, so you've got the Austrian German. And then my dad, he's from Greece, so you got the Greek. So there's 2 right there. But then growing up in Switzerland, it's officially there's 4 languages, but there's 3 big ones, and one is a very small language that only a few people speak. But in Switzerland, we speak German, French, and Italian. So in school, or the German is Swiss German essentially, and so there you go. There's the 5 languages. And I speak also a little bit of Spanish because of the Italian, because Italian and Spanish is very similar.
Absolutely, and I speak Spanish, and when I went to Italy, I was able to communicate without much difficulty, and so
there you go. Exactly.
yeah.
It's to me, before I encourage anyone to become an engineer, I always encourage them to become a linguist first and then become an engineer, because with language to me, that is the key to the universe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Giorgio, can you share with us a little bit about some of the books or publications that you have available?
So over the last couple of months, new issues of Legendary Times have come out, which I'm very excited about. But also, we're in the process of creating 4 more issues. And if anyone is interested in getting a subscription to Legendary Times or a membership, that would be at legendarytimesbooks.com. And like I mentioned earlier, we have 2 seats left for the tour to Peru and Bolivia in September 2016. And if you send us an email, it's office@legendarytimes.com. But at the same time, I really hope that you come to our conference as well, because in November, because if you can't make it to Peru and Bolivia, come to this conference.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it, Giorgio, and I can't imagine a better way to spend September than going with you to these fantastic places. Now, with the mention of Bolivia, one thing that I think is quite interesting is there in Tiahuanaco, you have artwork that speaks about these people they call the Hueco. And they look a lot like the Copelli that, Clifford Mahudi and others, not just from Zuni, but from the Havasupai and from the Hopi, speak about. Clifford Mahudi believes that the Copelli or the Kachina are actually extraterrestrials that live underground in tunnel systems. And there is legends in Tiahuanaco as well as Cusco about a system of underground tunnels that connect many, many places. David Hatcher Childress speaks about a place in Minas Gerais, Brazil, that has a tunnel system that he actually went into. There is another place that is fantastically interesting that not too many people have heard about. Eric von Daniken spoke about it years ago, and I've been there many times, and that's called Samiapata. And Samiapata is what Eric von Daniken originally described in Chariot of the Gods as an ancient landing strip. It's a quartz capstone on top of some interesting mountains near Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And there is a tunnel system. There is a tunnel there. I've been to it. And it goes down about 75 feet, and then there is 3 different horizontal branches that have been pretty much unexplored. They're restricted now because it's dangerous. But I have spoken to people and explorers and caretakers of that site that have been able to walk into it. And the legend is that it connects to Cusco. And what's interesting about Tiahuanaco is that these Huecos, these underground people that are legendary there and depicted in pictographs and pictoglyphs, look almost exactly like the Kachina.
Well, that's a fascinating story, especially because it corroborates in the story where in 1960, it's either 1957, 58, or 62 or 63, one of those 4 dates, where there are documented stories where these 2 young kids went or got lost in this underground tunnel system that leads outside of Cusco, and they were gone for either, and again, I'm sorry, I did not prepare for this because it's a fantastic question, but they were either gone for 3 hours or they were gone for 3 days. But regardless, they both came back, and one kid had either white hair or the other kid could no longer speak. But one of the kids also had a solid ear of corn made out of solid gold in his lap.
Wow.
And they were just, laughing uncontrollably, and they never spoke coherently ever again. So allegedly, they had a glimpse of the famed city of gold underneath or, close by to Cusco, because when Pizarro or Cortez came to conquer this area, the Inca made everything in their power to disappear or to hide the vast amounts of gold, of solid gold, that they had hired. And, this is what this wonderful treasure stories, why these treasure stories today still exist, that somewhere in the jungle, in the Amazon or in Bolivia or in Peru, that this fabled city made of gold, El Dorado, still exists, because allegedly this is where Atahualpa, the famed Inca emperor, that's where he hid or moved all the gold before the Spaniards could steal anything, or they only gave them a handful of the true treasure, which I think is awesome that the Spanish never succeeded.
Well, on the topic of gold, as I say, I'm a geologist and I've studied gemology as well. And gold has some fantastic attributes that a lot of people are not aware of. And some have even speculated that gold could be a power source. But Edgar Cayce speaks about the reason gold was originally considered so valuable is because it actually can increase human longevity. It can make you live longer. And and he speaks about gold chloride solutions as and not taking them internally, but putting electrodes into a gold chloride solution, and then holding metal rods that have a small electrical pulse going through that gold chloride, as increasing the vitality, increasing the health, and allowing for longevity. And that would be the reasons why the ancient people, the ancient rulers, collected gold and wore gold, because it has such tremendous benefits. And as you probably are aware, there is in China or Japan, one of the two, a bathtub that one of the ancient emperors had made out of solid 24-karat gold. And they would allow, up until recent times, people to, because it was privately owned, take a bath in that water. And they said that would give you another 10 years of life for just soaking in that water. So gold has some very interesting attributes.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. And, this all coincides with multiple stories of the Fountain of Youth, because many stories are connected with gold cups or gold coins and things like that, with which the Fountain of Youth was connected. So this is all very, very fascinating stuff, and I do think that there is knowledge, scientific knowledge, that over time has been lost. But at the same time, we should rejoice in the fact that all this stuff right now is being rediscovered, because we should be quite proud with the technological advances that we've achieved so far as a society, really.
Absolutely. I'm originally from Arkansas, and a lot of people are not aware that Arkansas is the largest singular deposit of quartz crystal on the planet. Now,
I had no idea. There you go.
I also lived in Brazil 7 years. Now, Brazil has a greater quantity of quartz, but what is in Arkansas is the largest singular unbroken strata of quartz crystal. And the quartz crystal that comes from certain parts of Arkansas actually has a little bit higher level of hardness or density. And you may recall, Giorgio, a few years ago, in fact, it was January 1st, 2011, there was this big national story about thousands of birds falling out of the sky in Arkansas. I don't know if
Yes, I remember this.
And so I grew up there. And that phenomena of birds falling out of the sky used to happen about once every year or two. And so when you look at quartz and recognize that it has a piezoelectric attribute, meaning that when any kind of stress is put on it, it puts out an electrical wave. My theory has always been that the fault line that goes into parts of Arkansas in the Northeast, there had been several earthquakes that year, and that pressure was released, and it stunned these birds, and they fell down. And so what I'm leading up to is that this unusual collection of quartz in Arkansas, which is massive, has also had a great number of legends about extraterrestrials. There was a story that was in the newspapers in the early 1900s of a ship that actually landed near Hot Springs, Arkansas, where I grew up, in which people met with these Nordic-appearing extraterrestrials and were actually invited on the ship. And that was actually in the newspaper. And there are these stories as well related to tunnels in certain areas there, with also reported stories of a blue race type of people that live there.
That's interesting because, in and around the area of Cusco, not only did we just talk about secret tunnels, but you can still, the government, what they did then in the late or mid 60s, whenever these kids returned and they were all, they couldn't speak and their hair had turned gray, the government or the military was actually commissioned to wall off the entrances to these tunnels. Now, those are the tunnels that allegedly these kids used. But there are remnants of other tunnel systems all around Cusco. So, and what's really fascinating too is that some of those tunnels are quite sophisticated, where you have a ledge in about hip height that just travels side by side with you on both sides, and when you touch the walls of those tunnels, it seems as if you're touching glass. It's vitrified. Truly amazing stuff, and it certainly is not chiseled, because you would see chisel marks, because here's the thing. You can see portions or areas where clearly chisels were used, but most often it's not chisels. It's like vitrified glass.
And, that is, and that leads me to one final question, because I realize I've taken most of the time, and I sincerely appreciate you giving your time for this interview today.
My pleasure.
And I'd like to end on this topic. Years ago, David Childress spoke about a cave that was reportedly found in the Grand Canyon, and I know you're aware of this, and was reported in the Arizona Gazette as appearing to be an ancient Egyptian cave. Now, I have actually rafted down the Grand Canyon 200 miles 5 different times. And this mystical area of this reported cave and the underground area that Clifford Mahudi speaks about is near the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Big Muddy Colorado River. And it's an amazing area. And so Childress and others have spoken about this particular cave. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on this Grand Canyon area and the possible existence of of a underground extraterrestrial base in that particular area. You know,
well, my thoughts are as follows. Yes, as you just said, I know about the story, and here are my thoughts. If any of your listeners knows anything about this or the location, they should email me at the same email, office@legendarytimes.com, and I'd be more than happy to check it out with you, because I've actually asked David about this as recently as a few weeks ago at Contact in the Desert if anything has happened with that story, and he said, well, you know, I don't know, and I said, well, let's organize an adventure there, and you know, maybe with your help and through this program, we can organize something.
I would be thrilled to do that. And, you know, Scott Walter of America Unearthed will also be with us in Denver. And I was speaking to Scott just a few days ago. He's also a geologist. And he actually did an episode that involved David and Clifford Mahudi. And during the filming of this episode, they were actually buzzed by helicopters. They were not allowed to get, and that entire area is blocked off.
I always take these stories with a grain of salt.
Well, you see these helicopters on the actual film, and but it is a fantastic area. You know, you start off when you float.
If a helicopter school is in the area or something like that.
Yeah, it's possible.
I always try to look at it from both perspectives, because, you know, some of these stories are just simply hard to believe.
Yeah, and also a lot of this area is on Hopi land, and you need permission to get into that area of the.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they have that underground area is called the Seppo, and it's off grounds, and you know it's restricted to the Hopi people, and it's right in that area, and that is the tunnel that they talk about going into.
Look, the whole idea that there may be a worldwide tunnel system, to me, is not far-fetched at all, because, you know, this, in a strange way, it all ties into the whole hollow earth theory, but at the same time, you know, if the hollow earth theory entails the idea of a worldwide subterranean tunnel system, then I'm actually a proponent of the hollow earth theory, because these are not topics that are too far-fetched, because we can prove a tunnel system. Whether or not that these tunnel systems actually connect, well, that's still part of the quest. That's what it all counts to figure out.
Absolutely. Giorgio, our time is drawing short. I could listen to you for hours. I think you're an absolutely brilliant pioneer, and I acknowledge you for that, and I honor you for that. We're really looking forward to seeing you in Denver. Our event is November 18th through 21, and our website is www.earth-keeper.com. It's on the screen now. I also have Giorgio's websites on the screen. Giorgio has a fantastic trip planned to Peru and Bolivia very soon. He has 2 spots open, and you can contact Giorgio through Legendary Times. And so thank you again, Giorgio. You're an amazing person, and we're honored to have you in Denver and look forward to seeing you soon.
It was a great pleasure, and I've heard so much about your event, so I can't wait to attend, and I'm looking forward to meeting everyone attending.